So here's the thing. This has got a really bad stink. This whole episode. I'll get right into it. That's what got my interest and has kept my interest. I was here actually helping some people right after the flood, and I know how awful it was and how it hit people in High River. And then to learn about what happened, to the people by a force that was not the river is hard to fathom. So I want to talk about the Emergency Management Act a little bit, the High River Emergency Plan, and the emergency bylaw that was in effect then in High River, and how that fits in with everything we've heard. I don't have time to go through the serial excuses or reasons, depending on your point of view, that were advanced by the RCMP for entering over 4,000 homes and by some accounts kicking in the doors to over 700 homes while people were away. But I will say this, it's not natural. It's not part of the common law, and it's not part of the Emergency Management Act either. And I began to get really interested when I started to see that on TV. I got interested actually before that with what happened in Slave Lake, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that before I leave this microphone too. But in any event, the Emergency Management Act is a piece of legislation that is engaged when a state of emergency is declared. Now, there's no doubt that these were emergency situations, a situation in High River in the 2013 flood. Nobody's arguing about that. The problem is what happened. Because you see, states of emergency are notorious. There's reports at the United Nations, for heaven's sake, about the abuse of states of emergency and the abuse of civil rights under a state of emergency. And so for me, it's not whether or not this was intended or whether it wasn't intended. It happened. The authorization to make warrantless entries in the Emergency Management Act, and I'll slow down here and take you through some points. It authorizes the local authority, which is your town council, or a delegation of the council, to authorize warrantless entry into buildings. As a lawyer, the word buildings usually doesn't mean homes. Let's assume it does. And that's a pretty big assumption. The Emergency Management Act limits the authorization to make warrantless entries, and that's what these were. The RCMP didn't go get warrants from a judge. That's usually what happens under our system. I think we all know that. If the police have grounds to come into my house because they suspect some criminality is going on, or there's some, I suppose, even public danger, this is how the system works. They go to a judge. They say, here's what we know. The judge says, yes, you can, or yes, you can't go to Rick Hemmingson's house and force open his door. That's how it's supposed to work. So we're talking about warrantless entries. This is where I decide, because I'm wearing a uniform, that I'll come to your house and kick your door in. That has to be done in furtherance of an emergency plan. That's the key, in furtherance of an emergency plan. So nobody's allowed to make it up as they go along. The High River Emergency Plan says nothing about disarming the people of High River. It says nothing about destroying many, many thousands of dollars worth of ammunition. And I don't take issue with ammunition people turned in and want to destroy. That's fine. The High River Emergency Plan, I have a copy of that here, if you like to see it. It's difficult to find online. I downloaded it and printed it. And I also have a copy of the bylaw that was enforced in 2013. You can have a copy of that if you want to. It seems to be no longer online. But when you combine those documents, there's nothing, for example, that says it shall be a purpose of our emergency personnel or our emergency operations center or our incident commander or any other label to go into houses and rescue pets. It's not there. So how does that excuse get offered to us as one of the later excuses for all these broken down doors? I don't know if you remember that one, but I do. That the RCMP were searching for pets to rescue. I'm gonna read the one small piece of this Emergency Management Act legislation, and I'm going to leave it alone. There's a list of powers in this act, that these powers are tripped when a state of emergency is declared. And here's the one that was allegedly used here. It's the power to authorize the entry into any building or on any land without warrant by any person in the course of implementing an emergency plan or program. So having read that, being a lawyer, I read the emergency plan. And like I said, it doesn't speak to these goals that were being offered as excuses for the housebreaking. In case anybody listening to this or here thinks I'm making a hill, if not a mountain, out of a molehill, I mentioned at the outset of my remarks that the UN has devoted some attention to these issues, and they have. And a state of emergency in their studies is two things. It's something that arises when a public emergency, and this could be a natural disaster, occurs which threatens the life of a nation. Now this was bad, what happened here. Yeah, it was bad. But didn't threaten the life of the nation. Didn't threaten the life of Alberta. It required some quick action. But did it require the suspension of civil rights? I don't think so. These documents talk about something called the principle of proportionality. And one of the reasons I think this is important is not just because we still don't have answers on what happened in High River. Nobody's been held to account, as they should be. But looking forward, I mean, where will we be at when other emergencies come up? And are they all going to be the same? Up in the county of Lacombe, we have a couple of really large gas plants. So if some terrorists decide to blow up the Joffre gas plant and a state of emergency is declared, should we have the same creation of powers as happens in a flood in High River? I don't think our government's ever thought about that issue, and they need to. Because there may well have been theoretical arguments for various powers in the Emergency Management Act, but do those arguments all apply in the case of water? Or do some of them only apply, with a biological attack, for example? Or with some things that happened in World War II? I want to read you Article 12 from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Right? This is from the UN. So this isn't some Alberta rednecks talking. This is the United Nations. And this has been their position for decades. Article 12. Canada is a signatory, along with a whole bunch of other countries. No one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home, etc. Everyone has the right to the protection of the law against such interference or attacks. Wasn't that what happened? Seems to me that's what happened. I mean, I get that there was a flood. But I'll tell you a little anecdote. Oddly enough, a lady came up to my office in Lacombe, of all places, from High River. I won't give you her name. Middle-aged lady. It was just after I got back from my trip down here, and I asked her how it went and was she flooded, you know, like you would. She said, no, it wasn't. My home was dry. That area wasn't flooded. But my door was kicked in. I live alone. I have no guns. It was pretty hard for me to have a shower. I mean, get your mind around that for a minute. So I have a hard time connecting that dot with the protect and serve thing. I want to close off with, I want to close off with a quote from McGill Law Journal on an article written as best I can tell around 1960. But before I read this to you, I don't want you to misunderstand that I'm making a call to some civil insurrection. I'm not. But these aren't my words. These are words of a law professor who was examining what had happened with the Japanese and other things in the history of this country. The role of the judiciary, what judges were able to do and not able to do. And in the last paragraph, he says something that I want to leave with you. And I quote, "There is no panacea for the maintenance of civil liberties during emergency. In the long run, the crucial factor in the preservation of civil liberties is the existence of a citizen body which is conscious that civil liberties matter and is willing, if need be, to fight for them." And that can take a lot of forms, but it does require something to happen. Some effort by all of us, because it's up to us, right? We are the people we've been waiting for, people. Thanks.